whenever you're ready, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, my name is Carrie Hare. I teach 7th grade math at Swope Middle School in Reno, Nevada. Today's lesson was on multiple representations and functions in the standard 8FA cluster.
Good work. All right, you ready for question 1?
Yes. Try to repeat the question.
Okay, so first question is, how does this...
Julie, I'm busy right now. No, come back in like 20 minutes. You'll be here still.
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
Okay. This lesson was around the function domain and multiple representations. Prior to the lesson, we spent a good deal amount of time looking at tables and graphs and a little bit of algebraic equations. During this lesson, the goal was for them to look at the structure of tables and graphs for a connection to the algebraic rule of the function and be able to look at those structures and create an equation.
We're fine, I turned them down.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm looking.
You feel good with that question?
I didn't repeat the question.
Okay, let's just go for it one more time.
Okay.
So first question is, how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it?
Okay. What was taught prior to this lesson was function representations. We looked at concrete functions, graphs, tables, equations. We looked at real-world applications, graphs, tables, and equations. And this lesson was taking it more to the algebraic side, where we looked at the structure of equations and graphs and how that relates to the algebraic rule and how they can extend those connections into writing an algebraic rule for multiple situations.
Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
The standard represented in this lesson was 8FA, standard 2 and 3, which talks about multiple representations and the structures of functions. In this lesson, we looked at those connections and tried to make those connections. I believe it hits the full intent of this standard because we're not just looking at a table isolated from a graph, isolated from an equation, but we're trying to connect those all three together so that they can create those connections. Did I do that one again?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
And then I'm also pull your hair back again so
Okay.
it's not hitting the mic. Perfect.
Okay.
You want me to read it again?
Okay.
Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
Okay. The function represented in this lesson was 8-F cluster A, standards 2 and 3, looking at the multiple representations and the connections between the functions. I believe I hit the full intent of the standard by connecting the graph, the table, and the algebraic equations rather than just teaching them isolated from each other. In the past, I may have just done a table and then talked about that, a graph, talk about that. But this one, we're connecting them all together, and that's what I believe the intent of this standard is.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this?
Okay, for the core action 1, I believe it really hit core action 1B, building on the coherence. And I don't want the kids to just see something 7 times in that repetitiveness. I want them to see it in multiple ways. So prior to the lesson, we looked at it through tile patterns, a concrete application, then a real world application, and then we moved it to the that mathematical application or side of things. So building that procedural fluency based on their applications in that concrete stuff. Okay, for core action 2, I believe I really focused on 2F. The reason I like 2F is that the teacher was selective about what the students shared in class, and I really tried to, maybe not as well as I wanted to, but I really tried to be selective about what notices they had throughout the lesson so it could relate to what my intent of the lesson was. If they shared and I noticed that I didn't think really fit with where we were going, I tried to move it in the direction that we were going or have other groups add on to it so it would move it into the direction we were going. And then finally, for core action 3, I think I tried to really hit C, which is orchestrate student conversations. By giving the students the sentence frames that I noticed and I wondered, it kind of guided them into what they could have, what I was hoping they would get from the lesson, rather than just saying, write some stuff down or their observations. It gives them a direction on what kind of observations I was looking for.
Do you want to talk about core action 2 one more time?
Yes. Okay, so core action 2, I picked F because that was the teacher is selective about the student conversations. And what I did is I tried to choose the I notices that directly related to what I wanted the students to gain from the lesson. If a group picked an I notice that I felt wasn't quite going the direction I wanted it to go, I would ask for some input from other groups to kind of guide it in that direction, and in the end, teach the intent of the structure of the algebraic equations. I think that's good.
Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Okay. Okay, so this lesson represents the shifts because I tried to make a clear focus and really focus the kids into the algebraic side of functions. We had explored the tables and the graphs prior to this. The coherence, because we had explored the tables and graphs prior to this, we were really trying to connect it to the algebraic equation. And then finally, the rigor. We didn't really do much application in this lesson, but prior to this, we had done application. We were trying to move this idea and this standard into the procedural, conceptual knowledge and the fluency.
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
Okay, pull my hair back. Okay. Prior to the CCSS, I did try to make connections, but they weren't deliberate. I will say my first year teaching AP Calculus really changed the way I taught because in that course, prior to the Common Core Standards, they really did push the multiple representations, the numeric, the graphic, and the algebraic. And so it was nice that I had taught that class because I did bring that into my regular classes. We looked at those connections. However, they weren't deliberate and they were a little bit isolated from each other. With the Common Core Standards, the math practices have really shifted my teaching. That's what I think the kids need to think about when they're practicing the mathematics, and then the shifts really have shifted the way I think about teaching. I think I hit almost
What is the same and
everything.
what is different?
Huh?
You hit everything?
Did I? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no, and now the 3s.
What's that?
Now the 3 and 4, which is what went well, what didn't go well. I'm like, I haven't had enough time to think.
How did the students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics?
I believe the students handled the lesson pretty okay. I think there were some connections that I wish they would have made a little stronger than what I had seen today. I will be going back and spending a little more time with the I notices and I wonders, because I think it's good to have those class discussions. And so that it went well that the kids did see some structure and they were starting to make the connections, but I don't know if they were as strong as I would have liked them to be.
Explain how you differentiated in this lesson. Did all students have opportunities to work on grade level content? If all students do not have the opportunity, explain why.
Yeah. I feel I differentiated this lesson in a couple of ways. In the beginning, when they were doing the warm-up, they could come up with their own way of figuring out a rule. Some looked at the structure, some looked at prior knowledge. I think having the multiple representations, the graph, the table, and the equation, lets students with different learning styles approach the problem from multiple entry points. I also think the sentence frames help, the I noticed and I wonders help with the differentiation, because students can go as deep as they want to go, and we can get into those discussions. But if students are still at that level where they're just trying to make small notices, it gives them the opportunity to feel successful in making those notices. I think I might want to try that one again. Okay. Or just the last part.
Yeah, you want to pick it up from the last section?
Yeah.
Okay. Wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay. In addition to the multiple entry points and the multiple representations, I think having the sentence frames also differentiated the lesson, the I noticed and the I wonders, because students could notice and wonder at the level that they were at in the class. And I believe that having those sentence frames helped all students reach the grade level standard within my class.
Okay, so then I'm going to have you pull your hair back again.
Okay.
And then the next one is, which behaviors from core action 3 did the students best exemplify? So which behaviors from core action 3 did the students best exemplify? And what did you do, or what actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
Okay. Okay, I believe core action 3, the teacher orchestrates student conversations, was illustrated by having the students come up with I notice and I wonders. That helped the students focus in on their conversations within the class on the intent of the lesson.
Do you feel like you had time to look at their submitted work, or do you want to, a better question is, was there something that delighted or surprised you with the students' work today when they were collaborating?
Okay, as far as the student work goes, what delighted or surprised me, I think initially when the students were first starting, they had a hard time making the connections I wanted them to make. And it's hard to teach a class where you're like, I would rather just stand up and say, this is how you do this. But you know the students aren't going to retain that information. So by them making those connections, that was the goal of this lesson, for them to retain the information. However, I felt like initially the students really didn't know what direction to go in. So what surprised me and delighted me was once I kind of got the ball rolling and telling them to really concentrate on what number in the equation relates to the tables, I had a few kids have their aha moments, and that was exciting to see that.
Great instructors are continuously learning, and we want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked well and what might you do differently?
Okay. So reflecting on this lesson, I think what went well was the initial, when we were doing the National Library of Virtual Manipulatives, the kids seemed excited to be able to come up with an equation. And I think what was kind of fun was they were looking at the structure of the equations and trying to come up with equivalent expressions that you could type in there and make it the graph work. So I think that went well. I think the idea behind the students making the connections went well. I believe if I could do it differently, I'd give them a little bit more time so we could really spend a lot more time on the linears and the I notices and the I wonders, and a little more time on the exponential. And so in the future, I would probably split this over 2 days rather than doing it in 1 day.
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
Were there any surprises or unexpected student reactions? I had a few ahas. Initially, when we did the warm-up and one of the students, Jacob, says, I remember in elementary school that I could look at, it went up by 4 and that was a coefficient of X. Kind of scared me for a second. I'm like, how much does he know? Or am I repeating a lesson that the majority of the class has already learned? But as I went through, I realized that a lot of students hadn't made that connection. And so it was nice seeing the students having their aha moments within those connections.
That's it?
That's it. Okay.
Very good.